Good morning, everyone. So fun story. I had actually recorded a sermon yesterday, and then I woke up this morning, and for some stupid reason, like I threw out my back, which is why you see the chair. When you see the chair right there, and my back is killing me. And then I realized it's kind of ironic given the scripture reading that we've got coming up for Sunday, which is Jacob wrestling with God and displacing the guy's hip. And so he's in all sorts of like muscle pain, and I'm like, right now if I look up beyond here, my back starts really hurting, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah, so super fun things. But then I actually was reading through some commentaries, which is, you can see the things here too, just because this Jacob wrestling with God is how I've always heard this passage described. But then again, the passage itself keeps referring to the person Jacob's wrestling with as a man, which is super weird, right? Like, why doesn't it just say, well, this is the Lord and he wrestled with God? And why is it some nebulous guy he's wrestling with? And so like there's a lot of ambiguity in the story. And so the sermon I'd actually recorded yesterday was about our involvement in how we work with the Bible and how we interact with God. Right. And so this commentary in particular, which is the Africa Bible commentary, and that was my coffee cup, but don't worry, it was empty. The Africa Bible commentary actually titles this particular passage not Jacob wrestles with God, but the Lord changes Jacob's name, which is kind of the end result after Jacob asks for a blessing, right? So what we're doing then in this story is kind of changing the focus if you change the name, right? So the focus is no longer on Jacob wrestling with God and winning, although we all like to win contests and things, but the focus then becomes on what the blessing is and what it means for Jacob as he continues on. And so I had talked a little bit in the sermon I recorded yesterday that, hey, like our hermeneutic and how we read scripture, the temptation is to read it like a recipe book, right? Like, I'm going to read the Bible. It's going to tell me to do some stuff. I'm going to go do some stuff, and then I'm going to be a good person. Unfortunately, it's much more complicated with that. And I think there was a value that the Jewish people put on wrestling with God, or wrestling with truth, or wrestling with scripture that we kind of have lost in our modern culture, right? We like our pat answers. We like to move straight past the I'm not sure what's going on. We like to know, right? We like certainty. I think the ancient believers in God were much more comfortable with not being sure and with really kind of mulling things over for a long period of time. And I think that I want to say it's a better way. Maybe it's an essential way. Like, it's a way we need to be able to do also. We need to have answers, but we also need to be willing to be unsure and really wrestle with something. I think it's also significant, like the meanings of Jacob's name and what it changed from and what it changed to. Jacob basically means the deceiver. So, which is also another word for, the devil. He's the liar and the father of lies. So Jacob's got this really negative name, he was the guy who cheated Esau out of his birthright for a pot of stew. He's the guy who didn't go out and do the quote unquote honest work of hunting. He stayed in the tents and, maybe, I don't know what he was doing, but in my experience, whenever there's money around and people are stationary, they tend to get into politics. So maybe Jacob was a little bit of a politician in the negative sense. And he and Rachel were kind of conspiring to make him superior to his older brother, which was very against the culture of the day. So like there's all these like negative tasting things to do with Jacob. But then his name gets changed, right? So he comes in, he wrestles with God, he demands a blessing, or he wrestles with a man, I guess, and demands a blessing. And the blessing that was given was a change in his name. And so like names are a huge deal, right? Like we've got like Mark and Rachel right now are pregnant and they're thinking about names and trying to pick a good name. I keep telling them that Andronicus is a good, solid biblical name they should use. They're not going for it. I don't think they're going to go with it. So I felt free to share that particular name. But the questions you keep coming up with when you find yourself trying to name a kid is, okay, what does this name mean to me? You know, for us, we named Kirsten because it was kind of a cultural name for me, frankly. A lot of my ancestry is Swedish. And my mom was going to name my sister, if we had a sister, Kirsten Sophia, which is, you know, a very Swedish kind of name. And so, you know, that was the name that we gave to Kirsten. And then Grace was kind of a head nod to the grace of God and, you know, Wesleyan theology and things like that. And then Junia, if you don't know who Junia is in the Bible, Junia was one of the female apostles from the early New Testament. So it's essentially our declaration of war, as it were, against anyone who would deny that there were female leaders of the church recorded in Scripture. The King James Version and a couple other conservative translations, for instance, read Junia's name as an apostle and went, no, this must be a dude. And so they put an S on the name. They called her Junius and said, well, Junius is an apostle, and that's a guy's name because obviously all the apostles are guys. So we named her Junia to kind of emphasize that. But yeah, so names have a really big significance. And so if your name is Deceiver, like, what kind of a life do you have to live? Or what kind of a life do you live because you're named Deceiver? And everyone just kind of expects that from you. Like, that's kind of intimidating, right? Like, that's not a good thing. You're gonna kind of carry that. That's baggage. That's a burden. And so the blessing that Jacob receives here is a name change from Jacob, or from deceiver, to now the new name is Israel, or one who wrestles, you know. He struggles with God is the translation that's really written out here. And so on first glance, that can seem like another negative name, right? Like, well, you're not lying anymore, but now you're struggling with God. I don't think it's reading too much into it, though, to say, well, it doesn't say he's struggling against God. It says he's struggling with God. I think that we would be missing something. There would be something essential missing from our spiritual life if we never struggled. Not all struggles are good, but I think that a life completely devoid of struggle likely means that you're either in deep denial or that something is very wrong or missing from your life. And so to be struggling with God means that you are engaged with God, you're aware of God, you're focused on God, right? And so, yeah, that kind of tradition continues with the people of Israel as well, because Israel was Jacob's new name in the story. And so the people of Israel, or the Jewish people, became a people who struggled with God. They kind of went back and forth, and there were other gods in the land, and they, like the whole book of Judges and Joshua is all about them trying to figure out their national identity, who they were as a people, finding a place to be, defending themselves against aggressors, and sometimes abandoning God and sometimes coming back. So they're very much a people who struggle with God, but they're a people chosen by God as well, just like Jacob was. They're the fulfillment of a promise. And so there's not really a prescription here to be taken. There's not a, here, go and do this, and then, you know, in 5 easy steps, you'll be a better Christian. A lot of people make a lot of money selling books like that, but that's not what you get often when you read the Bible. You get messy stories of churches and people and faith, and it's not simple most of the time. And so I'm going to encourage you that if you ever feel like your life is not simple and straightforward and you're not entirely sure what to do, you can either try and minimize the confusion and try and pretend like it's not there. Or I would encourage you to wrestle with God, to bring God into the conversation, to bring God into the decision and say, God, I need to know this answer. I don't know this answer. And I would like you to fix this, please. Let's wrestle. Let's figure this out. Let's look at every angle. Let's look at everything. And let's figure out exactly what it is that I need to do today. And then tomorrow morning we may wake up and we may wrestle overnight again. And then I'll figure out what to do tomorrow, you know. But there's a very much a give and take to the spiritual life. You're never done learning. You've never fully arrived. You can never sit back and go, oh, good, I figured it all out. I'm done now. Like, that's just not how it goes. I believe there will be progress to be made even in heaven. You can have perfect motivations, but you don't have perfect knowledge. And so you will grow and you will change and you'll adapt over time. And that's good. And so if you ever find yourself struggling with God, just remember that for Jacob, at least, that was a blessing. And it can be a blessing for you too.